Happy birthday today, Mighty Shadow, and we continue our conversation this morning. Now we switch the focus to Calypso History Month. As we would have mentioned, we're celebrating all August, all October long. And this morning, I want to welcome music sociologist Meagan A. Sylvester, who joins us on set to chat a bit about the impact of Calypso. Good morning to you, Meagan. How are you?
Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Happy Calypso History Month.
Same to you, Ruckus.
All right, so this morning we're talking a little bit about the impact, and specifically you have a podcast that deals with the New York experience of Calypso.
Indeed.
Tell me firstly why you decided to do this podcast.
Well, you know, traveling to New York and other places in the world, I realized, and also in doing conferences, I realized that Calypso, more than soca, you know, Trinidadians think that soca sometimes might be more popular. I realized that Calypso was really the music that people knew. And I realized that it had its tentacles all throughout the diaspora. And that made me think about, okay, so what were some of these migratory movements that took place to get Calypso outside of Trinidad and Tobago, outside of the Caribbean, and to New York and the wider spaces?
Right. Now, I know of the Windrush, which is one of the ways that it went to, but that would have been more to the UK. Tell me about the New York aspect of things.
So what you had, in particular, during the 80s and the 90s, you had this movement of artists going to New York to exploit their career. Of course, they went to other places, you know, like LA and other places, but it's important because I focus in this podcast on New York. And what was happening is that there was this movement back and forth. People would go to New York because the studios were there.
Right.
And you had the Calypsonians going, background singers going, producers and arrangers going right there to record. And then they would come back to Trinidad and Tobago and other parts of the Caribbean for the festivals. So it is important to think about that movement. And so I began to think about, so who were these people? All right, so we look at different, we look at bands and we look at individuals. All right, so we have the regular names you would be familiar with, let's say like Designer. We also had bands going,
Charles.
Right, etc. But the story with Rolston Charles is that he came from Tobago.
Right.
And he was actually in New York,
right,
actually having and owning Charlie's Records.
Right.
And he actually was a catalyst to many of the Calypsonians who would have gone up there actually to exploit their careers. So it's important to think about what caused the movement and what was ready for them in New York. And I think that is one of the central issues about this podcast that I do in speaking to people, because there have been two different series so far. I'm about to start, in Calypso History Month, I'm about to start the third tranche of this podcast. And in the previous ones, I spoke to Calypsonians, background singers, producers, arrangers, anybody who had anything to do with the Calypso as an entity, both in New York and in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Interestingly, what I got to do, because it's so important to think about who the people are, as I was mentioning, it's not only Trinidadian. So I got to speak to Frankie McIntosh, for example, you know, and we're talking about St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I got to speak to Carol Hodge, and he would have been out of Anguilla.
Right.
And, you know, it's important to think about this year, Anguilla celebrated 50 years of Carnival. And that's something that we're not really aware of. And they, you know, we think of Trinidad and Tobago, the mother of all carnivals. And in particular, we see the reach of our festival and the accompanying music of Calypso and how it has had that sort of impact.
Tell me about what was the genesis of it? Because you say you're going back to find out what caused this migration to happen. Was it directly for the music, or were there other factors that would have caused the migration to happen? So the economy, all the different factors like that.
Right. So people, in speaking to them in these interviews, people have said to me, listen, I wanted to have a better life. It started off like that for some people. Some people, other people, knew instinctively that they wanted to get an opportunity to expand their career.
Right.
And New York is this hotbed of activity. If you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. So it's that kind of thing that was an attraction. Some people also had family there, so they felt that it was a way to, you know, be with their family. So there are many reasons why.
Did Harry Belafonte's success play any role in this?
That's an interesting question. I think that what it did, because that was that first #1 album, right, in terms of Calypso, and it was so important in terms of putting Calypso on the map for North America and for people to know what the music was about. And of course it had that impact because people abroad that is outside of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean then had an understanding for what this music was like.
Right.
Of course, there was a lot of criticism about Harry Belafonte and what he really did for the music. Exactly. The king of Calypso, is he really a king? He didn't participate in our competitions, but the point about it is that he put the island on the map, he put the Calypso, the music on the map, and that is what became important. And so that facilitated, it was a sort of catalyst to facilitate the entry. Yeah?
Yeah. And in terms of the impact that Calypso has now, is it still as vast? Is it still as wide-reaching as it used to be?
Well, waxes and wanes. Waxes and wanes. But you know what is important? Earlier this year, Tuco took Calypso to New York. And I was absolutely delighted. I felt like the chickens were coming home to roost in terms of my podcast, because here it was. I was doing this work, and I saw the reality in that. You had Calypso Uptown at the Apollo. And it was really a great opportunity. Of course, I attended to see the Calypsonians from the Caribbean getting an opportunity to grace that particular stage and to have the impact. The place was packed to capacity for that particular show. It was well received, and it was really a wonderful thing to see Calypso in, Harlem. It was really a great experience.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, absolutely.
So the impact is still there?
I think it definitely is.
I wonder if that, but can we be honest and say, is that impact a matter of nostalgia, or was that they were ready and willing to receive the brand new Calypsos?
Well, the thing about it is that the Calypsonians who performed sang their hits. And so I think it was a combination of nostalgia, but also to remind people Calypso is here to stay, right? You may not have seen us for a while. May have been hearing a lot of soca music, but Calypso, we are going back to our roots. And I think that was important. Importantly, again, at the end of the show, the president of Tuco, what did he say? He said next year, exactly, is going to be the year of Calypso. So for me, that was really an important thing. For all of the, perhaps, naysayers, people who were saying Calypso, Calypso, but also to see that an active decision is being taken to take it to the next level. Yeah.
All right. Well, Meagan, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and congratulations on the podcast.
Yes.
We look forward to seeing where do we find the podcast if folks want to get it.
Right. Well, thus far, it's on my YouTube channel. All right, so this is meagansylvester.com. You can go there and you can see it. Of course, I will be taking steps to make it wide and ranging for more persons in the diaspora and in the world to have access.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And happy Calypso History Month, and continue to do the good work that you're doing.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we take a quick break and we come back with more on the Now Morning Show. Stick around.